The month of January is known as the dumping ground for bad horror films, but is there enough to justify a top 10 best? Find out in my latest top 10 ranking video. Stay tuned. Hey everybody, I'm Ken and welcome back to Mid-Level Media for my top 10 best January horror films of all time. That is right, guys. I had you all vote in my poll on YouTube and you all voted for the top 10 best January horror films, not the top 10 worst January horror films, which was my other topic that I was going to pick. I was all set to do that topic, but then I thought to myself, maybe my subscribers want to kind of weigh in on this subject. Maybe they want to be brought into the equation. So I had you all vote. What do you want to see? Do you want to see the best? Do you want to see the worst? And you guys actually made my job a lot easier because you wanted to see the best. And to be honest, going through the best was probably a lot more fun than having to revisit some of these worst bad January horror films, because everybody knows January as the month for the crap horror films. That is the dumping ground. That is where the dumpster fires like The Grudge, The Bye-Bye Man. That is where horror goes to die in the month of January. But here today, guys, I am going to bring to you 10 horror films from the month of January that are totally and completely awesome. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and ask that if you are not yet a subscriber of the Mid-Level Media channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button for more great content. I do all kinds of great content on this channel centered around the world of movies, physical media, Blu-rays, 4Ks, all of that great stuff, and I would definitely love for you to come be a part of this community on a regular basis. Also, if you don't mind, hit that like button for me. Every single like will help videos like this move it up those YouTube algorithms and help get more eyes on it. Also, comment down below some of your favorite January horror films. Do you have a top 3? Do you have a top 5? Do you have a top 10? Weigh in the comments below and we'll have a discussion on our favorite January horror films, because there's actually quite a few of them. I actually went through and found at least 18 that were worth discussing as far as like being the best. Are all of these all-time classics? Are they in my top 20, top 30 favorite horror films of all time? Some of them might be, but definitely not all of them. But all of them on this list, this top 10 list that I made today, are at least what I would call good horror films. Now, I do have a couple important things to note before I go into some of my honorable mentions. I haven't seen a couple notable films on here. I actually haven't seen quite a few notable films, but two I want to call out that a lot of people say are awesome. Great horror films from the month of January that were released in the month of January is Tucker and Dale vs. Evil, came out in 2010, and The Stepfather from 1987, this older horror film from back in the day that I actually hear is pretty awesome. Now, I need to check that one out at some point. Another thing that I'm going to note is that I'm not counting any films that premiered or debuted or had a festival entry in the month of January, because if I did that, honestly, my job would have been a whole lot easier. Films like Silence of the Lambs, The Blair Witch Project, The Witch by Robert Eggers, The Babadook, Saw, all of those had their premieres, festival premieres in the month of January. So it would have been a whole lot easier if I included those. So only the ones that were theatrically released in the month of January for that year. The ones that were released in that day and then went on to have a box office run. So, and sometimes that can get a little tricky because some of these on this list did have debuts before, but I'm talking about wide theatrically released films in the month of January. So let's get into some of the honorable mentions, guys. Before we get into the top 10, I want to call out Escape Room. That is a movie that came out in 2019 that I thought was okay. It wasn't phenomenal, but it was definitely better than the standard that had been set in years previous as far as horror films. I thought it was a nice surprise for that month for January horror, and I rather did enjoy the film. Another one, guys, that I want to call out is the My Bloody Valentine remake from 2009. It's actually a pretty fun slasher. And also David Cronenberg's Scanners from 1981. That actually came out in the month of January as well. I just recently watched that for the first time. I didn't love that film, but I thought, it's good enough to be an honorable mention in at least the January horror list. I don't know about any kind of all-time best horror list, but as far as January horror, I can consider Scanners an honorable mention. So without further ado, guys, let's do it. Let's get into the top 10 best January horror films. And coming in at number 10, guys, is a movie that I grew up on. This is an iconic horror villain that started in the 90s. This film came out in 1993, launched the franchise, and that is Leprechaun, starring Jennifer Aniston in her first starring role. I think it was her first movie role, movie appearance ever. This was before Friends even came on TV. Leprechaun, I've always thought, as much crap as some people give it, as it not being that good, it's actually just one of my favorite films from the 90s as far as horror. I enjoy this film quite a much. A lot of that has to do with nostalgia, I know, and honestly, I haven't seen it in probably 10 years, but I enjoy this film. I think it has fun characters. Warwick Davis as Leprechaun is awesome. He created this iconic character that carried this franchise through 7, 8 films. Now, he's since been replaced, but if it wasn't for Warwick Davis and what he did and the fun that he added to this character, bringing in another horror icon like in the same vein as Freddy, as Chucky, that kind of taunts his victims in that kind of joking way and style. And Warwick Davis is awesome in this movie. Leprechaun is my number 10. And coming in at number 9, guys, is a film from a franchise that I love, at least the first 3 films. Now, they definitely dip in quality after the 3rd one, but a lot of people like to point this one out as being kind of the bright spot that nobody really talks about in this franchise, and that is Paranormal Activity, the marked one. So this was directed by Christopher Landon. You do not know who that is. He directed the Happy Death Day films. He directed the recent film Freaky with Vince Vaughn and Catherine Newton. And I think that this is a very strong entry in the franchise. So I've only seen it once. I saw it when it came out, and I remember thinking that it was better than 4, but definitely not as good as the first 3. But I would say that's good enough to earn it its number 9 spot on my list. And coming in at number 8, guys, another sequel to an iconic franchise, and that is Final Destination 2, releasing in theaters on January 31st, 2003. And this is the sequel that starred Ali Larter, who was in the first one, but none of the other cast. I don't think Devon Sawa came back to the film, but this is the one that you'll always remember for that opening kind of car crash scene where all the logs come out of the truck at the beginning. And it is the reason why every single time I get behind a truck with trees in the back or tree trunks or logs in the back, I'm like, I get it over in the other lane. I'm not even gonna take any part of that. And all of that comes from Final Destination Part 2. And other than that, it's just a really fun movie with some great kills and some great moments. And I like it, and I think it deserves its number 8 spot. Coming in at number 7, guys, is a movie that I don't think a lot of people will really have on their radar. It is a creature feature film directed by Stephen Sommers. If you do not know who Stephen Sommers is, he directed both of the first Mummy films with Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz. And this movie came out on January 30th, 1998, starring Famke Janssen, of course, as part of the X-Men franchise, and Trent Williams, and this is called Deep Rising, the story of a cruise liner ship that gets overtaken by this multi-tentacle monster. I just remember this being a really cool movie that I enjoyed watching over and over again when I was a kid for some reason. There's some really great gore in this film. There's a scene actually where the tentacle comes up through the toilet and actually like sucks somebody through and blood flies everywhere. It is a massacre at the beginning of the film. It literally kills like everybody on the ship but 10 people. And they're kind of left figuring out how to overcome this beast tentacle monster that rises from the deep. It's just a really cool film that I remember enjoying a lot, and honestly a movie that I need to check out again. And now coming in at number 6 is a film that I can't believe I actually put this high up on any list, because to be honest, I'm not a huge fan of this era of horror during the 2000s, the whole torture porn, Saw craze that happened. But yeah, there's no denying this was a very important film for the horror franchise at this time, and that is Hostel, directed by Eli Roth. This movie released on January 6th, 2006, and it kind of elevated everything that Saw established as far as like the whole torture porn saga of horror, that whole generation that I really don't like or engage with. But I will say that this movie is very disturbing, It's actually pretty atmospheric for this type of horror, and I think it's actually quite good, and it's one that still holds up today. I've actually watched it recently and thought it was pretty good. So I will put Hostel at number 6 on this list because I know that there's a lot of Hostel fans, and it is a January horror title that's actually pretty decent. Coming in at number 5, guys, is a film, another creature feature, and actually a movie that just got this fantastic Arrow box set back in December, and that is Tremors from 1990, starring Kevin Bacon. This is just one of those iconic horror films, creature features from that era. I watched it last year. It holds up. It's still super fun, super awesome performances, fun characters, fun moments, and a fun monster, new age monster that was incorporated into the monster movie genre. The next one on my list, guys, coming in at number 4, is another obscure one that not a lot of people may have heard of, but if you're probably watching this channel and you're into horror, you've definitely heard of it. So this came out on January the 13th, 1995, and it was one of 2 Tales from the Crypt films that came out, and this was the first one. This was called Demon Knight. Tales from the Crypt presents Demon Knight, starring Billy Zane. Really fun movie, really awesome story that I used to love watching all the time as a kid, and I actually really need to grab the Scream Factory for it. Demon Knight is awesome. That's coming in at number 4. And at number 3, guys, now we are arriving to the cream of the crop, some legitimately great horror films that I love. This one right here might throw a few people off. I know that maybe some people might not consider it horror in that way, but I do, because I consider any movie that's like a creature feature, a monster film, that is definitely absolutely in that horror genre. And this movie came out on January the 18th, 2008, actually getting ready to have its anniversary here in a couple of days. It is directed by the guy who is getting ready to direct the new Batman movie, Matt Reeves, and that is the found footage monster film Cloverfield. I remember being in I remember sitting in the theater getting ready to watch Transformers in 2007 and seeing the preview for this film, and it absolutely blew me away. I of course knew of found footage type films from like Blair Witch and a couple of other obscure ones that came out in that era, but this was before I saw Paranormal Activity, and that really lit the found footage craze on fire. And this was just such an interesting way to shoot a monster disaster type flick that I had never seen before in my entire life. It was so creative, so unique, and I remember sitting in the theater watching this movie and just being on that roller coaster ride for that 85 minutes or however long the movie is. I love the characters in this movie. I love the entire journey that happens in this film. And it just felt so real and awesome, and everything in it about it, this movie I loved. I've watched it at least 5 or 6 times since. I really love this film and still love this film to this day. And now coming in at number 2, guys, you know, it's hard to imagine, especially the highs and lows of this guy's career. He started off so strong with films like The Sixth Sense, with Unbreakable, with Signs, you know, and then having those kind of mediocre films. I know a lot of people love The Village. I do not. Lady in the Water, The Happening, which was completely ridiculous. M. Night Shyamalan was going downhill at this point, and if it wasn't for films like The Visit, another found footage movie that kind of brought him back into the consciousness of the genre horror lovers, I don't think he would have been able to make a film like Split, which is my number 2 on this list. And this is the one that a lot of people might question, but this started its theatrical run on January 20th, 2017. So I will count it, but I know it had its big premiere back in 2016. And a lot of people saw it. This is a really cool movie with one of the best performances of the past 10 years, in my opinion. James McAvoy gives a tour de force performance of like 23 different personalities. I know he's not all of them within the film, but he's at least like 5 or 6. Fantastic performance. This is Anya Taylor-Joy also coming off of her great performance in The Witch. She's fantastic in this film. If I have to give this film a little criticism, I would say some of her friends in the movie weren't the best actresses. But yeah, overall, I really love this movie a lot. And just the things that it sets up with the next movie, Glass, and how it ties into the Unbreakable universe at the end. It's just an awesome movie, and I really, really enjoy Split. And it's definitely an anomaly as far as like January horror films are concerned. So Split is my number 2. And coming in at number 1, guys, is a film that when I was going through this, because let me give you all a little backstory to how I came up with this list. I didn't just throw this list together willy-nilly. I actually went back and did my research. I went all the way back through the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, and 2010s to make sure I got every single January horror film that was released in theaters that I possibly could. I had all of my options open on the table. And when I saw this movie, I said, this is my number 1. Of course, this is my number 1 because this is one of my top 50 favorite movies of all time. It was one of my favorite movies growing up as a kid. This film is just one of the coolest, slickest movies that I've ever seen in my entire life, directed by Robert Rodriguez, starring and written by Quentin Tarantino, starring George Clooney, Juliette Lewis, Harvey Keitel. It is just one of the best monster vampire movies ever made, and that is From Dusk Till Dawn is my number 1. And when I saw that it came out in January of 1996, I was so surprised. I was like, I can't believe that movie came out in January. It's freaking awesome. What a treat for those in 1996 to actually have this freaking fantastic genre masterpiece coming out in January. I mean, this is just one of the coolest movies. It's a movie that, you know, it starts off as one thing, it ends as the other. It's the way that it blends and shifts genres throughout. It's like a thriller type heist movie in the beginning. Then it turns into a creature feature. Then it turns into like a full-on vampire monster massacre. And it's just so freaking cool. George Clooney, this is still my favorite George Clooney performance. I think he's freaking awesome and cool as hell in this film. Then you have Salma Hayek. Salma Hayek in this movie. It's just so freaking cool, so freaking awesome. From Dusk Till Dawn is my ultimate definitive number 1 January horror flick of all time, without question. So with that, guys, I appreciate you guys watching this top 10 list. The first of, I hope, many top 10 lists in 2021. I do love ranking things. I love the process and had such an awesome time putting this list together. So if you like lists like this and you want to see more, be sure to drop me a like and let me know in the comments below what your favorite January horror films are. What is your top 3, your top 5, your top 10? Hell, maybe there's 20 that you love. Leave it all in the comments below and let me know, guys. And also be sure to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Turn on all bell notifications for future videos, and we'll see you next time.